Behind Boris Johnson's flagship net zero climate policy lies a powerful organisation you've likely never heard of.
The work that we've done in my organisation, the Climate Change Committee, shows us that we can get to net zero, and actually the overall cost across the economy and across the next 20 to 30 years is really low.
That was Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, one of the most powerful public bodies in Britain. The committee has held immense sway over successive governments since its foundation 13 years ago. Yet most people don't know what it is, why it exists, or what its aims are. Net zero will almost certainly mean higher energy prices, converting to electric vehicles, hundreds of billions of pounds of investment, and potentially higher taxes. Yet the elusive Climate Change Committee, who have consistently pushed governments to adopt more and more radical policies on climate change, remains largely unknown to the public.
The Climate Change Committee was set up under the Climate Change Act 2008, which was the responsibility of the Department for Energy and Climate Change at the time, and Ed Miliband was the Secretary of State in post. It's very much part of a broader trend under the new Labour government of trying to sort of take these really important aspects of policy out of politics. They were considered to be too important to be left to the whims of politicians making decisions based on what they thought would be electorally beneficial for them. And we ended up with lots of these technocratic specialist committees being set up, and the Climate Change Committee is a really paradigm example of that. The effect that it has is to take these really important policy decisions out of political accountability, and so the government can plough on with whatever agenda it is attached to. And let's be clear, the current Conservative government is even just as attached to the decarbonisation agenda as Ed Miliband was, perhaps even more so, and it can push forward all of these policies under cover of, well, this is the scientific advice, we're just following the advice of the Climate Change Committee.
In May 2019, the Climate Change Committee recommended that the UK should aim for net zero emissions by 2050, claiming the policy is necessary, feasible, and cost-effective. The outgoing Prime Minister, Theresa May, signed this pledge into law as one of her final acts as PM.
That's why today we're announcing that we will be ending our contribution to climate change by 2050 and legislating for a net zero emissions target.
The Climate Change Committee is extremely powerful. Governments generally tend to adopt their advice. They also seek out the Climate Change Committee's advice on certain specific matters. So in 2019, when Theresa May wanted to make our 2050 target even more ambitious than it was at that time, she was obliged to seek the advice of the Climate Change Committee, which she duly did. And the Climate Change Committee rather predictably said, yes, of course, we should increase the ambition of our target and commit to a legally binding net zero by 2050. And this advice was adopted wholesale, basically, by the May government, and they amended the target with really no parliamentary debate or scrutiny at all. They did it by way of a statutory instrument, even though the Treasury knew that the cost of that measure would amount to tens of billions of pounds.
The Climate Change Committee claims to be an independent body and has the power to advise on policy that has a huge impact on people's lives. However, there are concerns about its lack of intellectual diversity and its independence.
The Climate Change Committee's advice is also quite alarming because it just covers so many policy areas that impact on everybody in their day-to-day lives and livelihoods. It's actually quite surprising to think that a piece of advice like the recent reports they've been delivering to government, they included up to, I think, 200 policy recommendations. It covers everything from food to energy to home heating. They even pronounce on things like foreign aid. And it does seem quite surprising that when there's such a huge diversity of policy areas, that a single committee could come up with a single view on all of them. They seem very blind to free market solutions, which I think undermines the proposition that they truly are balanced and independent. Members of the Climate Change Committee are appointed by the government. So in a sense, it would be surprising if the government would appoint people who it knew would vibrantly disagree with their whole policy direction.